show. We appreciate you joining us today. Joining us now, Pete Sepp with the National Taxpayers Union, the president of the NTU. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Going well, and that's appropriate music. Hold on tight to your dreams before the government gives you a nightmare.
Man, touche. I hear you. So we just had a recent ruling concerning a case that involved Google. Tell us about that.
Well, this is a big deal. It's been described as the biggest antitrust case against a U.S. tech company since the Microsoft case back in the late 1990s. So this is monumental in the sense that the federal government, as well as attorneys general at the state level, are suing Google in really 4 separate actions. This recent decision to narrow 2 cases is important in several respects. Without getting too technical, of course, antitrust is a weapon or a tool, depending on how you look at it, that governments, state and federal, use to punish what's called anti-competitive behavior or unfair practices. And the 4 cases against Google generally center on whether Google is being unfair to competitors in the way that it shows its advertising results and its search results, or Google's being unfair in the way that it treats advertisers on its platform, either forcing them into exclusivity agreements or preloading its own browsers on phones and the like. So the 2 cases by the attorneys general, 38 of them now, as well as the Federal Department of Justice, was heard recently in a U.S. district court for which charges are actually going to stick and be heard at trial. And the judge very recently, just about 10 days ago, said that there are several of these 7 government charges that are going to get thrown out. There are actually only 3 out of the 7 that the government's going to be able to argue in court on the merits on September 12. The ones that got thrown out had to do with complaints, for example, that when people try to use Google search, well, they're boosting their own products in search results over those of specialized sites like Yelp or Travelocity. Well, that's just Yelp and Travelocity complaining that Google is disadvantaging them. The judge said, well, you're not really proving anti-competitive behavior there. All you're basically saying is you're upset that some firms are getting disadvantaged over others. What does this have to do with consumers rather than competitors' interests?
Yeah.
And I think the judge made the good call there in throwing out some of those charges and focusing on ones that might or might not have some merit to them. We'll find out in September.
Yeah, Pete, having grown up business-wise, professionally in the IT world and started my company in the early days of the personal computer and watched all this stuff unfold, remember the Microsoft suit. I mean, the deal was, they're shipping a browser with the operating system. Remember that? Internet Explorer.
Yes.
And third-party browsers, Netscape and the like, said, well, that's not fair. That comes with it. They're bundling it in the operating system so that when people buy a personal computer and they fire it up, it's already got a browser on it. But, that's pretty dang convenient to the consumer. That's where you get into. Yes. It's the same thing with this situation with Yelp and Waze and the others that are squawking about Google. Well, it's still pretty convenient to the consumer. And, my response there would be, well, go create a search engine and then go compete on that basis. And it's not like you don't have other options for search engines, and those companies could cut deals with the other search engine companies. But the fact is, there's something about having sort of one standard a lot of times, and especially in the software world. We watched IBM really just get stomped out by Microsoft in the PC operating system world. Maybe a lot of people don't remember that, but IBM tried their dangdest with OS 2. But the market just said, no, it's inferior. We don't need multiple. And the IT world said, we can't support one, much less two, proliferating throughout our landscape. So a lot of this, I hope courts think about what's in the best interest of the consumer here, not just the competitor.
Yeah, exactly. And courts need to remember that government interference in the markets on behalf of competitors or consumers can sometimes be counterproductive. You mentioned, for example, IBM. Well, they were under antitrust suits for a number of years for anti-competitive behavior. They were hobbled from being able to compete and introduce some of their own innovative products. Microsoft, the same way. When government is tipping the scales and putting a thumb on it from one firm to another, that's what's actually going to hobble competition. They're hobbling competition in the name of encouraging competition, which just doesn't make any sense.
And Pete, don't we have the same situation with Apple and their payment system in the iOS operating system? We have the same thing with Amazon, where they're accused of promoting their own brands over third-party sellers on their platform. But the reality is, without Amazon, there is no third-party seller industry. So shouldn't they get some reward for that?
Yeah, exactly. And we keep having to remember, too, that government is moving at the speed of government here. And because they are not adept at embracing technologies of their own, I mean, look at IRS, FAA, the whole alphabet soup trying to modernize their own IT systems. They
30 years behind.
And then they're trying to tell others, well, you have to get with the program, you have to innovate, and we're going to create the conditions for it. They have no idea how to do it. And when they try, then these suits drag on year after year and hobble companies' capital because they're having to pour it into defending themselves, or shareholders stay away and investors get reluctant. That by the time these cases get settled, many of these companies have long since been surpassed by somebody else. That's what happens. It was said at the time that MySpace was going to dominate social media and the internet for the foreseeable future. These were people in the early 2000s saying they're unbeatable, they're a monopoly, nothing will ever stop them. Who uses MySpace anymore?
Right. Yeah, it's a great point of how this impairs innovation, and you're absolutely 100% right. You get the investment community, the capital they need to produce innovation and to get it to market, which is another big part. You can innovate all day long, but if you don't have a way to get it to market, which costs money, then you're going to fail. You're not going to really optimize and produce the return on investment that is sought by those that put capital into these projects. But they sit back and say, well, heck, you got the government coming after you. Why do I want to put money in your company? We're watching the same thing play out in the fossil fuels industry. Every day the government says we're shutting you down. And so the fossil fuels executives say, well, we're not going to spend any money to increase supply, which would bring the cost down to consumers, when we got an overbearing government that says, we want you out of business. This is crazy.
That's right. And here's where taxpayers really come into the picture. Of course, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice spend not only fees for merger filings, but actual general tax dollars on some of these prosecutions. Of course, that's a waste of money. Many of the attorneys general of the states involved in these suits spend millions when polls show that this is a very low priority for their citizens. We've actually done some polling on that. When you poll people about what their attorneys general should be doing, wow, prosecuting crimes and combating human trafficking go to the top of the list. Prosecuting antitrust ranks 3 to 4% as a priority. But beyond all that, look at all the innovations that have helped governments and taxpayers save money, happening from cloud data storage to improvements in customer service that they ought to be embracing and saving our money with. And yet these prosecutions are guaranteeing you won't get that innovation in the future.
Point. It's a great point. Pete, really appreciate you coming on and explaining all this. I read the press release. It was great. Hopefully this will be an indicator, a precedent for what we'll see in the future. Just lay off of this. This is not where we have problems in society. Go solve some real problems, as you said. Appreciate it, Pete. Thank you.
Amen. My pleasure.
Pete Sepp, president of National Taxpayers Union, has been our guest.